Welcome to Moonlight Audiobook. Wherever in the world you're watching from, whether it's morning, evening, or deep into the quiet hours of the night, I'm truly glad you're here. I'm your host, Julian, and here, under the soft glow of moonlight, we do things a little differently. This is your space to slow down, to step away from the noise, to pour a cup of something warm, tea, coffee, or perhaps something a little stronger, and lose yourself in stories that linger long after the last word is spoken. Every tale you hear on this channel has been chosen to pull you in, whether it's a chilling mystery, a timeless classic, or a journey through shadows and secrets. So, take a deep breath, get comfortable, dim the lights, and let your thoughts drift as the pages come alive. Chapter 1. The Orient Express arrived in Aleppo at precisely 5 minutes past midnight. Cold winds swept through the station as the train hissed, groaned, and came to a halt under a blanket of pale starlight. From the shadows of the platform, the great Belgian detective, Hercule Poirot, stepped down. He was a man of neatness and care, small, with a military moustache so precisely waxed it seemed to defy wind and movement. His overcoat was buttoned meticulously, and a scarf looped once at the neck with calculated elegance. There was no hurry in his step, no wide-eyed survey of his surroundings. He simply paused, took a shallow breath, and moved forward, as if the world adjusted itself to suit his pace. Behind him came a porter, huffing under the weight of 2 well-packed valises. A tall man in uniform approached quickly from the shadows. "Monsieur Poirot, I presume." Poirot gave the briefest of nods. The man saluted. "Captain Noggy, British Army Liaison in Syria. We received word of your arrival. Rooms have been prepared at the Tokatlian Hotel in Istanbul. Transport is ready." Poirot replied with a small smile, "Excellent. You are very kind, mon capitaine." The journey to Istanbul was uneventful, though Poirot spent most of it in silence. He sipped tea on the train's forward-facing bench and allowed his thoughts to unspool. Though he was returning from a successful case in Syria, one involving a vanished ambassador's wife and a staged suicide, Poirot's instincts, those delicate instruments of deduction, refused to sleep. They whispered, "Rest may be deserved, but danger may still be en route." At the Tokatlian Hotel in Istanbul, Poirot was greeted with the efficiency and charm known only to the most prestigious establishments of Europe. Rich Persian rugs cushioned every step. A chandelier above the lobby sparkled in 1,000 points of reflection. At the concierge desk, Poirot was handed a telegram, urgent. He opened it without expression, but his eyes flicked across the words with precision. "Return London immediately. Important development in a Bernathy case. Stop. Urgent." The signature at the bottom was from his London associate, a man who rarely called unless the matter was life or death. Poirot walked calmly to the front desk. "I must return to London as soon as possible. Please secure me a berth on the Orient Express." The receptionist, young and apologetic, blinked nervously. "The train departs tonight, monsieur, but it is fully booked. Every compartment, even the second-class cabins." Poirot raised an eyebrow. A fully booked train in February? Intriguing. The receptionist gave a helpless smile. "A coincidence, perhaps. There are several diplomats and a royal party from Hungary, I believe. And the snow in Europe has delayed many travelers. Would monsieur like us to send a wire to the railway company?" Poirot nodded. "Please do. Use the name Monsieur Bouc of the Compagnie Internationale des Wagonslies. He will assist." Indeed, within the hour, Poirot received confirmation. A berth had been arranged. The Orient Express would depart that evening from Hercule station. At the train station, the platform bustled with movement and chill. Porters in navy uniforms called out names. Steam hissed from beneath the carriages like a sleeping beast disturbed. Lamps flickered across the polished maroon and gold finish of the fabled train. The Orient Express, a legend on wheels. Poirot found himself alongside Monsieur Bouc, director of the Compagnie Internationale des Wagonslies, short, round, and full of Gallic energy. "Mon ami!" Bouc exclaimed, embracing Poirot with delight. "It is fate that you travel tonight. What luck for me! I shall have company worth the dining car's wines." Poirot inclined his head. "And I shall have entertainment." There is always entertainment where people are forced to dine together at fixed hours. Bouc laughed and gestured toward the first-class sleeper. "Come, come. The compartment is small, but it is yours. I gave up mine for you. That is how one knows we are friends." They boarded. The warmth inside the train was immediate and pleasant. Dark wood paneling, brass fixtures, plush velvet upholstery. A porter in immaculate uniform led Poirot to his cabin. Across the narrow hallway, a pair of English women were already fussing with their bags. The older woman, wrapped in furs and indignation, exclaimed loudly, "You there! My bag, the large one. I want it at the foot of my bed. And the blue hat box must not be jostled. It's real ostrich." Her voice carried. She was Mrs. Hubbard, an American matron of loud opinions and louder anxieties. Beside her stood Miss Debenham, younger, reserved, a governess by her posture and choice of clothing. She said little, her gaze fixed on the corridor, or, more accurately, on avoiding Mrs. Hubbard's endless commentary. Poirot watched them both briefly, then entered his own cabin without a word. The train began to move. Gently at first, then with purpose, as the great machine pulled away from Istanbul and into the night. Dinner was served in the dining car, a subdued elegance, with crisp tablecloths, polished silver, and the hushed tones of international conversation. Poirot dined beside Monsieur Bouc, but his eyes wandered. At one table sat Colonel Arbuthnot, tall and severe, engaged in quiet conversation with Miss Debenham. Though their tones were clipped and formal, Poirot noted the subtle glance exchanged between them, a familiarity not typical of strangers. Across the car, a young man with slicked-back hair and nervous hands ordered a double brandy. He introduced himself loudly to anyone who would listen as Hector McQueen, secretary to an American businessman. That businessman was seated alone at the rear of the car. Mr. Samuel Ratchet, lean-faced, with a tight-lipped expression and a predator's stillness. He watched the room with cool detachment. Something in his posture reminded Poirot of old wolves. Later that night, back in his cabin, Poirot was brushing his moustache when a knock came at the door. He opened it to find Ratchet himself. The man offered a polite nod. "Monsieur Poirot, may I have a word?" Poirot stepped aside. Ratchet entered, his voice low, his demeanor suddenly cautious. "I've heard of you. You're the detective, the Belgian. I'd like to employ you." Poirot said nothing, his eyes narrowing slightly. Ratchet continued. "I'm a man who's made enemies. You understand. Business. Money. Some people don't forget. I've received threats. I believe someone on this train wants to harm me. I want protection. I'll pay. Handsomely." Poirot studied him for a long moment. "I do not like your face, monsieur. I decline your offer." Ratchet's face hardened. "You'll regret it." Poirot remained calm. "That is possible. But I have been guided more by instinct than coin. And my instinct tells me, none." Ratchet turned on his heel and left. Poirot closed the door and locked it quietly. Outside, snow had begun to fall. Lightly at first, then heavier. The train pushed northward into the dark Balkans. The trees grew thick. The air colder. And in one of the sleeping cars, a clock ticked softly. The stage had been set. The players had taken their places. And beneath the velvet and brass of the Orient Express, a secret waited to be uncovered. Chapter 2. The snow fell heavily overnight, blanketing the Balkans in a suffocating white silence. By morning, the Orient Express sat motionless on the tracks, stalled somewhere between Vinkovci and Brod, in a remote, wooded region. The rails disappeared beneath thick drifts, and no engine in Europe could force the train forward until the line ahead was cleared. Within the train, the air was warm, scented faintly of coffee and coal, but charged with a new kind of tension, the kind that precedes the unthinkable. Hercule Poirot awoke later than usual. He had not slept well. Strange sounds in the night, footsteps, muffled voices, a cry, perhaps, had stirred him more than once. But he attributed the restlessness to the snowstorm and the steady rocking of the car until it stopped altogether. He dressed slowly, buttoning his waistcoat with care, then stepped into the corridor. A porter passed him, pale, flustered, and moving quickly. Poirot stopped him with a raised hand. "A moment, if you please. The train is not moving." "Yes." The man, clearly troubled, nodded. "Oui, monsieur. We are stopped by snow." But, he hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. "Something has happened. I cannot say more. M. Bouc is in the dining car. He asks for you. Immediately." Poirot gave a slight bow. "Then I shall go immediately. Merci." In the dining car, Monsieur Bouc stood near the far end, speaking in hushed tones with a uniformed man. When he saw Poirot, he waved him over. His expression was grave, his usual joviality replaced by unease. "Mon ami, it is terrible, truly terrible." Poirot seated himself calmly. "What has happened?" Bouc leaned in. "The American, Ratchet, he has been found dead. Murdered in the night." Poirot showed no surprise. "Stabbed. Repeatedly. The doctor says perhaps a dozen wounds, maybe more. Some deep, some shallow. We are not sure. The door to his compartment was locked from the inside. The window is open, but no footprints in the snow. And no one saw anything." Poirot sat back, his fingertips meeting beneath his chin. A locked room murder on a train stalled in a snowdrift. Remarkable. "You must investigate, Hercule. There is no police. No access to a city. No help coming. And there is a killer on this train." Poirot nodded once. "Very well. I accept. But I will require full access. To the compartment. To the passengers. To everything." Bouc exhaled with visible relief. "Of course. Anything you need." They moved immediately to Ratchet's compartment, where the body had been discovered. Dr. Constantine, a Greek physician who happened to be aboard, stood inside examining the corpse. The smell of blood and something medicinal filled the cabin. A broken watch lay on the bedside table, its glass cracked, its hands stopped at 1:15. Ratchet lay in his bed, fully clothed in silk pajamas. His face was pale, rigid. The bedclothes were stained deep red. A dozen stab wounds marked his chest and torso, some precise, others erratic. The doctor looked up as Poirot entered. "A most unusual killing, monsieur. There are deep wounds, clearly fatal. But others are superficial, almost hesitant. It is as if two people stabbed him. Or one person, with two minds." Poirot examined the scene with care. The window was open, snow clinging to the sill, but no footprints below. The door had been locked from the inside. There were no signs of forced entry. He turned to Bouc. "We will need to question every passenger. No assumptions. No favoritism. Begin with those in the first-class car." and ensure no one leaves their cabins unless requested. Bouc nodded. I will make the arrangements. Poirot moved slowly about the cabin, collecting fragments. A burned scrap of paper in the ashtray caught his eye. He delicately lifted it with tweezers. The words were mostly gone, but a single name could be made out. Daisy Armstrong. Poirot froze. For a long moment, he did not speak. Then he turned to Bouc. Do you recall the Armstrong case in America? Bouc blinked. The kidnapping? The tragedy? The child? Yes. It was years ago. Poirot nodded slowly. That man, he said, pointing to the corpse, was not Ratchet. He was Cassetti, the man who kidnapped and murdered Daisy Armstrong. He escaped American justice. But it seems, justice has caught up with him here. The interrogations began promptly. The first to be questioned was Hector McQueen, Ratchet's secretary. He was nervous, disheveled, and fidgeted with his tie constantly. Poirot asked simply, Monsieur McQueen, were you aware of your employer's real identity? McQueen hesitated. I had my suspicions. He was always paranoid, always checking locks. But I didn't ask questions. I only took dictation and handled his correspondence. And where were you last night between midnight and 2? McQueen rubbed his forehead. I was in the smoking car. I left him around 11. I didn't go back to his compartment. I swear it. Poirot studied him. Your father was the district attorney on the Armstrong case, was he not? McQueen's face went pale. Yes, but I had nothing to do with this. I didn't even know who Ratchet really was until just now. I couldn't have. Poirot gave a slow nod. Thank you. That will be all. Next was Mrs. Hubbard, flustered as always, her fur coat askew. I told everyone something was wrong, she burst out. I heard a man in my room last night, right through the door between my cabin and Mr. Ratchet's. I rang for the porter. I said there was a man in there, but no one believed me. And now he's dead. Poirot listened carefully. You heard a man in Ratchet's room? At what time? She considered. I can't be sure. I was half asleep. But just after 1, maybe? Then I locked my door. I was terrified. And did you see anything else? Hear any voices? Footsteps. Footsteps in the corridor. I assumed it was the conductor. Or perhaps that awful Russian woman in the next cabin. She walks like an elephant. Poirot made a note. One by one, the passengers gave their accounts. Princess Dragomirov, the severe Russian aristocrat, spoke with pride and authority, declaring she had slept soundly and knew nothing of the murder. Her maid, Hildegard Schmidt, confirmed her story but seemed nervous, as if she knew more than she dared admit. Miss Debenham was calm and collected. Too calm, perhaps. Poirot noted the precision in her answers, the care with which she measured her words. He asked if she had heard anything in the night. Only the storm and the wind. Nothing else. Colonel Arbuthnot, the tall, disciplined Englishman, was direct. I was in the smoking car with McQueen until well after 1. Then I returned to my cabin. That's all. Poirot raised an eyebrow. You and Miss Debenham, you are acquainted? The Colonel's expression tightened. Only in passing. Nothing improper. Poirot did not press the point. The interviews continued. A Swedish missionary, a German maid, an Italian valet, each with their own alibi, their own denial, their own version of the night's silence. But Poirot's mind turned not to their words, but to their eyes. Their hands. The spaces between what was said and what was withheld. Back in the dining car, Bouc waited anxiously. What do you think, Poirot? Is it one of them, or someone we have not yet considered? Poirot placed his hand over the burned paper fragment. Mon ami, it is no longer a question of who had a motive. It is a question of who did not. Chapter 3. Outside the train, the snowdrifts deepened, curling in thick, frozen waves across the Balkans. Trees stood half-buried in white. The air was motionless, as if the entire world held its breath. Inside the stranded Orient Express, Hercule Poirot sat alone in the dining car, fingers pressed lightly together, gazing through the frost-laced window. His thoughts were no longer tethered to the present, but swirling around the past. Ratchet was dead, murdered in a locked cabin. The passengers all claimed ignorance, and yet, the clues scattered like breadcrumbs, each one strange, none quite fitting. He reviewed them again in silence. The wounds, some brutal, others hesitant. The locked door. The open window, but no footprints. The watch stopped at 1:15. A woman's red kimono found in a man's compartment. A button torn from a uniform. A pipe cleaner left behind. A voice heard in Ratchet's cabin around midnight, speaking in French. Each piece on its own, meaningless. But together, a jigsaw in the shape of murder. Poirot rose and made his way back to Ratchet's compartment. The train was quiet now, the kind of quiet only snow can cause, when sound is swallowed before it even begins. Inside the small cabin, he examined the bed once more. The body had been removed, but the atmosphere remained. The curtains still stirred where the wind had crept in. The faint scent of aftershave lingered beneath the sharper edge of iodine and blood. He checked the door's lock, bolted from the inside, just as the porter had reported. Then he turned to the window. No signs of entry or exit. The snow outside was flawless. Virgin. No one could have left that way without leaving a mark. Poirot's gaze drifted down. There, in the corner, wedged behind the washbasin, lay something small. He reached for it delicately, a gold monogrammed handkerchief, embroidered with the letter H. He studied it for a moment. A woman's handkerchief. Expensive. Fragrant. Yet none of the female passengers, thus far, had names beginning with H. Interesting. He returned to the restaurant car, where Monsieur Bouc and Dr. Constantine were already seated, awaiting his analysis with barely restrained tension. Bouc leaned forward. So, mon cher, what do you make of it? Poirot laid the handkerchief on the table, beside the previously discovered pipe cleaner and button. We are being asked to believe this was a spontaneous act of violence. Perhaps someone who disliked Ratchet, someone from his past. But I am beginning to suspect something. Elaborate. Staged. Designed. Dr. Constantine frowned. You mean, a planned murder? With false clues? Poirot nodded. OUI. Too many clues, and all too perfect. A handkerchief dropped by accident. A button torn from a conductor's uniform. A pipe cleaner, yet the deceased did not smoke a pipe. Bouc shook his head. But who would plant false evidence? That is madness. Poirot leaned forward. Or genius. Consider, we are in a sealed environment. No one can leave. No one can arrive. A perfect place for murder, and an equally perfect place to control suspicion. He paused. Let us speak with the conductor. He may reveal more than he knows. Pierre Michel, the conductor of the first-class sleeping car, arrived with a mixture of deference and confusion. He was a middle-aged man with tired eyes, a short graying beard, and a nervous habit of wringing his hands. Poirot gestured for him to sit. Tell us about your duties last night. From midnight until morning. Pierre cleared his throat. I checked each compartment once the passengers had retired. I recall Mr. Ratchet asked to be left undisturbed after 11. He rang the bell once around 12:30. I went to his door, but he said he had made a mistake. I thought nothing of it. Poirot interjected gently. Was it Ratchet's voice you heard? The conductor paused, uncertain. It sounded like him. Or close enough. The voice was gruff. Poirot made a note. And did you see anyone in the corridors after that? Pierre nodded slowly. Yes. I passed the Italian man, Foscarelli, going to the lavatory. Also, the English colonel. And I believe I saw the Swedish lady, Miss Schlessorn, moving about. She was looking confused. She gets disoriented in the dark. Poirot folded his hands. And the uniform button we found? From your jacket? Are any of yours missing? Pierre checked his coat carefully, frowning. No, monsieur. All buttons intact. But I had a spare uniform, older. It was in the luggage closet near the staff quarters. Anyone could have taken it. Poirot raised his brows. Ah, so someone could have disguised themselves. Pierre blanched. Yes, I suppose. But why? Poirot said nothing. He had already turned his thoughts elsewhere. Next, Poirot requested an audience with Greta Schlessorn, the Swedish missionary. She entered clutching a Bible, her eyes wide, her hands trembling. Poirot smiled kindly. Do not worry, mademoiselle. I seek only your recollections. When did you last see or hear anything unusual? Greta clutched her scarf. It was very late. I had gone to use the lavatory, perhaps around 1 in the morning. I saw no one. But when I returned, I thought I heard a cry. Very faint. I assumed I was imagining things. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Did you visit Mr. Ratchet's compartment at any point? No. Never. Why would I? I would not speak to that man. He frightened me. And this handkerchief? Poirot asked, lifting the embroidered silk. She shook her head quickly. Not mine. And I do not know anyone with H as a name. She was dismissed, though Poirot noted her tremors did not stop until she was halfway down the corridor. The next passenger to be interviewed was Countess Andreni, a refined woman with delicate features and intelligent eyes. She spoke softly, with poise, and her gown was immaculate even amidst the snow-stranded chaos. Poirot placed the handkerchief before her. Madam, do you recognize this? She examined it without touching. It is fine, perhaps French. Not mine, I'm afraid. You are Hungarian, I believe. Yes. My husband is the Count. We were traveling to Paris. A holiday. And your Christian name? Poirot asked casually. The Countess hesitated, then answered, Elena. Poirot smiled, but said nothing. Later, he checked her passport. The name had been smudged. A spill of ink obscured the Christian name almost entirely. Curious. One by one, the passengers were questioned again. Poirot was not merely asking questions. He was feeling for cracks, testing stories, measuring glances. When he summoned Hildegard Schmidt, the Russian princess's maid, the woman entered with rigid posture and clenched fists. She spoke with hesitance, and when asked about the burned note bearing the name Daisy Armstrong, her gaze dropped. I have heard of it. A tragedy. A baby taken from her crib. Terrible. And what of Mr. Ratchet, or Cassetti, as he was truly called? Did you know who he was? She hesitated. No. I heard whispers. That's all. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Mademoiselle, I believe you do know. And I believe you recognize that name, Daisy Armstrong, because you once worked in that household. Hildegard's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her hands clutched the arms of her chair. Poirot continued. You were the cook. Yes? For the Armstrongs. The night Daisy was taken, you were there. Tears formed in the corners of her eyes. She whispered, "Yes, yes, I was there. But I did nothing. I saw nothing. We were helpless. We all were." Poirot pressed no further. He had confirmed what he needed. Back in the dining car, Poirot convened with Bouc and Dr. Constantine. He laid out the facts carefully, one by one. This is no simple murder. No act of chance. Cassetti, the man known as Ratchet, escaped justice once, in America. But he brought with him a shadow. A past. And now that past has caught up with him. He pointed to the burned note. This scrap of paper, with the name Daisy Armstrong, was nearly destroyed. But not quite. That tells me the killer, or killers, knew it would incriminate them. They tried to erase it. They failed. He gestured to the button, the handkerchief, the watch, the red kimono, the different wounds. These are not mistakes. They are messages. Each one designed to confuse, to suggest a false narrative. Dr. Constantine asked, "Then you believe the killer was one of us? A passenger?" Poirot answered softly, "I believe the killer was not one person, but many." Bouc gasped. "Mon Dieu! A conspiracy? On a train?" Poirot rose from his seat. This was not revenge by an individual. It was justice, by a jury. Each one of them with a reason. Each one with a memory. Each one with blood on their hands. Chapter 4. The snow outside showed no sign of mercy. It pressed against the windows of the Orient Express like a wall of silence, suffocating and endless. The stranded train had become not just a crime scene but a floating island adrift in a frozen sea. Within its polished walls, Hercule Poirot continued his methodical investigation, not with hasty accusations, but with calm, razor-sharp inquiry. The clues had grown stranger. A woman's silk kimono found folded inside his own luggage, placed deliberately. A conductor's uniform missing from storage. A watch stopped at 1:15. Wounds too different to come from a single hand. And now, he knew one truth above all others. The death of Samuel Ratchet, formerly known as Cassetti, was not an act of random vengeance. It was planned. But by whom? Poirot had requested that all passengers assemble in the dining car once again, not for further questioning, but for an announcement. The atmosphere was different now. Less polite. More tense. Even the snow seemed to listen. They sat at their respective tables, hushed and rigid. Faces once amused or curious were now pale, watching Poirot with wary eyes. Miss Debenham clutched a handkerchief she didn't seem to notice. Mrs. Hubbard dabbed at her temple with a trembling hand. The princess, regal but unreadable, tapped a ringed finger against her teacup. Poirot stood calmly at the end of the car. He began softly. "Ladies and gentlemen, you may not yet understand this, but we are all in the presence of history. A man, a criminal, was killed last night aboard this train. And though the snow blocks us from the outside world, we are not without light. The truth is here, among us. I intend to bring it forward." He paused, scanning the room. Mr. Ratchet, as you now know, was Cassetti, the man who kidnapped and murdered Daisy Armstrong, the American child whose death shattered a family and rippled through many lives. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some exchanged glances. Others looked away. Poirot continued, "I do not ask whether he deserved to die. I ask only, who among you decided to kill him?" Silence. Then, with a gesture, Poirot turned and left the dining car. The passengers sat still, confused, disturbed, whispering. The game had shifted. Poirot returned to his own compartment, where Monsieur Bouc and Dr. Constantine waited. Bouc paced. "You are trying to provoke them." Poirot folded his arms. I am watching who trembles, who whispers, who stays silent. It is the pressure of guilt I am studying, not their words. He sat and gestured toward the table. Let us now consider the red kimono. Dr. Constantine looked up. It was found in your suitcase. Poirot nodded. Placed there while I was out. By someone trying to draw me away. Or to distract me. He picked up the silk robe carefully. It is a woman's. Expensive. Faintly perfumed. And it matches none of the declared luggage from any of the ladies on board. Bouc leaned forward. Perhaps it was hers? The Countess. Poirot shook his head. I checked her belongings myself. And Princess Dragomarov? Her clothing is of another style. This kimono is Western. Younger. He rose. I will search the train again. From end to end. Not for answers, but for intentions. The corridor of the sleeping car was narrow and hushed. The thick carpet absorbed even Poirot's careful steps. As he passed Mrs. Hubbard's compartment, he paused. She opened the door suddenly, as if waiting. Mr. Poirot, she cried. I must speak with you. It's urgent. He entered. She pointed toward her nightstand. That compartment through there, ratchets, it has a connecting door, right? And I told you, last night I heard someone in there. But look what I just found this morning in my sponge bag. Poirot stepped forward. There, nestled beside a small bottle of lavender oil, lay a bloody dagger, narrow, sharp, its tip stained brown red. Poirot did not touch it. He examined it from above. Mrs. Hubbard fanned herself furiously. I swear, I didn't put it there. Someone is trying to frame me. Poirot said nothing for a long time. Then, the bag was closed. Yes, clasped tight. I didn't open it until after breakfast. Poirot gave a slight nod. Thank you, madam. That is most interesting. Back in his compartment, Poirot sat once more with Bouc and Constantine. The evidence was growing not just confusing, but suspiciously so. A dagger, hidden in a sponge bag. A kimono, in Poirot's suitcase. A button in plain sight. A pipe cleaner. A burned note. All planted. All deliberate. Bouc threw up his hands. I do not understand. There are too many clues, and all point in different directions. Poirot murmured, exactly. That evening, he asked to see the Count Andreni. The man was tall, elegant, with a military bearing and fierce loyalty. When asked about the red kimono, he denied knowledge of it. Poirot pressed further. And the handkerchief with the letter H? Surely it could belong to your wife. The Count's eyes narrowed. My wife's name is Elena. Poirot studied him. And yet the label on her passport was smeared. And her luggage monogram reads H.A. Her true name is Helena. Isn't it? Helena Goldenberg. Sister of Sonia Armstrong, mother of the murdered Daisy. The Count stood sharply. You will not harass my wife. Poirot replied gently, I do not intend to. But we must accept truth where it leads. The Count turned and left without another word. Poirot then called for Miss Mary Debenham and Colonel Arbuthnot, together. They arrived quietly. Neither looked surprised. Poirot leaned back. You were overheard, you know. In Aleppo. You said to the Colonel, not now. When it's all over. Curious. Miss Debenham remained composed. I was referring to a different matter. Poirot replied, were you? You worked in the Armstrong household as a governess. You loved that child. When she was taken, you must have felt rage. Grief. Colonel Arbuthnot stood. Careful, monsieur. Poirot's voice remained calm. I think you were all involved. Each one of you. Connected to the Armstrongs. in service, in friendship, in blood. When Cassetti walked free, you decided justice would ride with you, not the law. Neither of them denied it. They simply looked away. In a final private conversation, Poirot summoned Princess Dragomirov. She sat with her usual iron composure. "You knew Sonia Armstrong," Poirot stated. "I did. She was my goddaughter." "You introduced her to Colonel Armstrong." "I did." "And you brought along your maid, Hildegard Schmidt, who also served in that household." "I did." Poirot leaned in. "You arranged this, didn't you? Or at least permitted it?" She didn't flinch. "I approved. Yes. That man destroyed a family. And now he has paid." Poirot nodded slowly. That night, Poirot sat in his cabin alone. He stared out at the snow and considered what he had uncovered. 12 people on the train had motive. 12, like a jury. Each had a reason to hate Cassetti. Each had known the Armstrong family. The chauffeur, the nursemaid, the housekeeper, the secretary, the family friend, the godmother. They had come together, different nationalities, classes, languages, united by sorrow and justice denied. And in the silence of the Balkans, they had delivered their verdict. Poirot prepared 2 solutions to the crime. The first, a stranger boarded the train. He killed Cassetti, escaped through the window, and disappeared into the snow. Simple, convenient, believable. The second, 12 people, acting as one. A murder meticulously choreographed. A punishment where the law had failed. The truth. But now, Poirot would have to decide whether the world was ready to hear it. Chapter 5. The snowstorm had not relented, but inside the stranded Orient Express, a different kind of storm was quieting. The truth had settled. The air, once filled with speculation and lies, now carried the weight of confession, or near enough. The passengers had revealed more than they realized. Their glances, their silences, their nervous tics, Hercule Poirot had watched it all. Each detail, each contradiction, was a piece of a greater puzzle. And now, he had solved it. Poirot sat in the dining car once more, the table before him empty but for a white linen napkin and a cooling cup of black coffee. Across from him, Monsieur Bouc paced restlessly, his hands clasped behind his back. Dr. Constantine sat beside him, silent, the kind of silence one wears before a diagnosis. Bouc finally turned. "Mon cher Poirot, please, tell us. You know who did it, don't you?" Poirot gave a faint smile. "Indeed, my friend. I know everything. And I have prepared 2 possible explanations for the murder of Mr. Ratchett, or should I say, Mr. Cassetti." He placed his napkin down. "Let us begin with the first theory, the simple one." Bouc and Constantine leaned forward. Theory 1, the lone intruder. Poirot's voice remained calm and clear. "Last night, as the train lay still, a man, unknown to any of the passengers, boarded the train. Perhaps he had been hiding in the baggage car. Perhaps he slipped in during the brief stop at Vinkovci. He entered Mr. Ratchett's cabin through the communicating door from Mrs. Hubbard's compartment, killed him with a dagger, and escaped through the window, careful to wipe away his tracks." Dr. Constantine blinked. But there were no footprints in the snow. Poirot raised a finger. "Ah, he must have boarded the train before the snow became too deep. Or else, he jumped down to the wheels, hiding beneath. This unknown man escaped detection, disappearing into the night." Bouc shook his head slowly. "It explains everything, but convinces nothing." Poirot nodded solemnly. "Correct. It is neat. Too neat. It is a fiction, invented not to reveal the truth, but to protect it." He leaned in. Now let us speak of the second theory. Theory 2. Justice on rails. The dining car was utterly still. Poirot spoke softly now, like a man recounting a tragedy, not solving a crime. Mr. Ratchet was not merely murdered. He was executed. By a jury of 12 passengers aboard this very train, each one connected, in some way, to the Armstrong family. He looked at each item in turn, laid out before him like relics. The broken watch stopped at 1:15. The pipe cleaner. The monogrammed handkerchief. The missing conductor's button. The red kimono. The dagger found in a sponge bag. The burned scrap of paper with the name Daisy Armstrong. Poirot continued. Each clue, each misleading item, was deliberately planted, not by accident, but as part of an elaborate staging. They sought to point the blame in every direction at once. To confuse. To hide the truth in plain sight. He folded his hands. Now let us count the people involved. Poirot began listing them, one by one. Hector McQueen, secretary to Ratchet. Son of the district attorney who prosecuted the original Armstrong case. Colonel Arbuthnot, friend of Colonel Armstrong. Representing justice and honor. Mary Debenham, the Armstrong family's former governess. Intelligent. Calculating. Princess Dragomarov, godmother to Sonia Armstrong. A woman of fierce loyalty. Hildegard Schmidt, the princess's maid, and former cook in the Armstrong household. Greta Schlessorn, former nurse to Daisy Armstrong. Countess Andreni, Helena Goldenberg's sister of Sonia Armstrong. Daisy's aunt. Antonio Foscarelli, the Armstrong family's former chauffeur. Masterman, Ratchet's valet, once valet to Colonel Armstrong himself. Pierre Michel, the train conductor. Father of the French maid who was falsely accused after the child's death, and who took her own life. Hardman, a detective, secretly engaged to the same French maid. Mrs. Hubbard, the most theatrical of them all. Real name, Linda Arden, a once famous actress, and Daisy Armstrong's grandmother. 12 passengers. 12 lives shattered by the same man. 12 motives. 12 wounds. 12 verdicts. A jury. Dr. Constantine leaned forward, his voice hushed. Are you saying each of them stabbed him? All 12. Poirot nodded. Yes. A communal act. Each taking part. Each bearing a portion of the guilt. Or, perhaps, none at all. Bouc sat stunned. But, why so elaborate? Why the disguises, the misleading clues? Poirot answered simply. To protect one another. To ensure that if any were caught, none would stand alone. They formed a pact. They rehearsed. They created alibis for each other. Even the timing of the murder, the watch stopped at 1:15, was likely manipulated. He paused. And the wounds? Some deep, some shallow, a reflection of their individual roles. Some struck with fury, others with trembling regret. Bouc whispered, My God, what a story. Poirot stood. A story of grief and justice denied. Of vengeance dressed as retribution. And a question, not of who, but of what is right. He called for all 12 passengers to be summoned to the dining car. They entered together, quiet, united. Poirot addressed them. Mesdames, Messieurs, I have 2 solutions to present. One, of an unknown assailant, a stranger who boarded the train, killed Mr. Ratchet, and vanished. The other is the truth. He walked slowly down the aisle between them. You were all connected by sorrow. You lost family, friends, innocence. You witnessed a monster escape justice. And you chose, together, to deliver it. They said nothing, but none denied it. Mrs. Hubbard, Linda Arden, stood. Her voice, though aged, carried the strength of her stagecraft. Mr. Poirot, we do not deny what we did. But we are not murderers. We are survivors. Cassetti destroyed more than a child. He tore apart homes. He ended lives. What we did because no one else would. Poirot listened in silence. She continued, "We leave ourselves in your hands." Poirot later stood alone with Monsieur Bouc and Dr. Constantine in the conductor's office, far from the ears of the passengers. He repeated what he had said before. There are two possible solutions. One, we tell the police that a stranger boarded the train. The other, we tell the truth, and hand over 12 people, each with motive, each with blood on their hands. Bouc was pale. But what justice would that serve now? Cassetti is dead. The world is no poorer for it. Dr. Constantine nodded. It would only destroy more lives. Poirot closed his eyes for a moment. Then he spoke. Very well. When we are rescued, and we will be, we shall report the first theory. The unknown stranger. It is simple. It is sufficient. It is palatable. Bouc exhaled. Merci, mon ami. You have done what the law cannot. You have chosen mercy. Poirot looked away, out the frosted window. Not mercy, monsieur. Balance. Even justice must know when to stop. Outside, the snow finally began to thin. The clouds above stirred, revealing fragments of sky. In the distance, a rescue team appeared, silhouettes against the white. The Orient Express, its secret buried in snow and silence, would soon resume its journey. But within it, 12 passengers carried the weight of what they had done, and the strange peace of having done it together. And Hercule Poirot, standing in the shadow between right and wrong, had once again uncovered the truth, only to let it quietly slip back into the dark. Chapter 6. The storm had begun to loosen its grip on the mountains, but within the polished carriages of the Orient Express, tension had only grown. The passengers moved carefully now, conversations muted, footsteps wary. What had begun as a night of strange inconvenience had become a study in fear. Poirot, seated once more in the restaurant car, folded his napkin with precision. His eyes, though still calm, carried the weight of hidden calculation. He had peeled back the first layers of deceit. What remained was the truth, buried, but intact. And so, one by one, he continued to call the passengers. This time, it was the Princess Dragomirov who arrived, her bearing as regal as ever, despite the confined quarters of a stranded train. Her dark gown rustled like dry leaves as she moved. Her face, carved by time and pride, held no apology. Poirot stood as she entered. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Please, Princess, let us speak plainly." She sat without hesitation. "I expected this summons. I would be disappointed had you not." He offered a small smile. "You are a woman of formidable presence. You have been so in every moment since we met." She gave a faint nod. "Flattery will not move me, Monsieur Poirot, nor will threats." Poirot's tone remained gentle. "Then let us speak of Sonia Armstrong." A flicker of grief passed behind the princess's eyes. "She was dear to me," she said at last. "I was godmother to her mother. The Armstrongs were family in all but name." Poirot continued, "And when Sonia died in childbirth, when her baby was taken and killed, when the French nursemaid was accused and took her own life, it must have felt like a war had been waged on your family." The princess's hands were clasped tightly, the knuckles white. "I remember Daisy. I remember her laughter, her curls. I remember the letter that came, and how everything turned to dust after that." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And so, when you saw the man responsible, Cassetti, Hiding behind the name of Ratchet, what did you feel? The princess's voice, though low, was iron. I felt that justice had failed, and that, if there was to be justice, it must be reclaimed. Poirot nodded once. I believe you were not the architect of the murder, but its guardian, the matriarch who gave it consent. The princess said nothing, but in her silence, Poirot found confirmation. Later, Poirot summoned Greta Schulzorn, the Swedish missionary and nurse. She entered nervously, hands clasped, her Bible tucked beneath her arm. The lines around her eyes were deeper than the day before. Poirot offered her tea, which she declined with a shake of the head. She sat opposite him, trying not to meet his gaze. He began softly, Miss Schulzorn, you were once a nurse to Daisy Armstrong, were you not? She nodded faintly. Yes, I loved that child. I still dream of her. Poirot said, you were dismissed from the household after the kidnapping. Tears filled her eyes. I blamed myself. I let her out of my sight for only a few minutes. I didn't protect her. It was my duty. Poirot reached gently toward her, not to touch, but to calm. Miss Schulzorn, you were not the cause. The one who did this was a monster, and you were punished for what was not your fault. She sobbed quietly. Madame Armstrong forgave me. I stayed with her until her final hours. Her heart was broken. Poirot paused. You were asked to come on this journey by Princess Dragomarov. She nodded, whispering, yes, she said I would find peace. I did not understand at first. Poirot asked, and did you participate in the act itself? In the murder? She hesitated, then looked up. I did. For Daisy. For the nursemaid who was blamed. For myself. Poirot sat back. The wounds on Cassetti's body, some were angry, some were hesitant. Yours, I imagine, was the latter. She wiped her eyes. I did what I had to. Poirot offered no judgment, only understanding. Thank you, Miss Schulzorn. You may go. She left, shoulders shaking, but somehow lighter. With each conversation, the web tightened. Poirot now saw the structure of it all. A plan, as carefully orchestrated as a symphony. Each passenger, a note. Each alibi, a pause. Each lie, a harmony with the rest. But he was not done. Not yet. Next came Antonio Foscarelli, the loud, smiling Italian with the glint of a salesman and the secrets of a servant. He arrived with a broad grin, clearly masking nervousness. Ah, Monsieur Poirot. I trust you found your killer, eh? Poirot gestured for him to sit. I may have. Let us see what you can add. Foscarelli leaned back, trying too hard to appear relaxed. Poirot began. You are an automobile dealer. That is what your papers say. Indeed. I sell the finest cars in Italy, and America, too. Poirot nodded. But before that, you worked in New York. For a family. Driving them. Foscarelli's smile froze. Poirot continued, the Armstrongs. You were their chauffeur. Foscarelli dropped the act. Yes, he said, suddenly serious. I was. Mr. Armstrong was a great man. Fair. Strong. The kind you would follow into battle. When that little girl died, the whole house fell apart. Poirot leaned forward. You participated in the murder. Foscarelli gave a long, quiet nod. I was the first to volunteer. That man, Cassetti, he bought his freedom, but not his soul. Poirot said, and your alibi, it was given to you. Foscarelli smiled bitterly. We all gave each other alibis. That was part of the pact. Poirot said nothing. He simply gestured toward the door. Thank you, Signor Foscarelli. Poirot sat alone after the man had gone. The car was quiet again, though he felt the echo of truth ringing in the corners of the wood-paneled walls. The pieces were nearly in place. But one voice remained absent, the one who had given this plan its breath, its heart, and its stage. He requested the presence of Mrs. Hubbard. She entered slowly, no longer the flustered, gossipy American matron from days earlier. Her face was bare, her movements measured. She sat without a word, folding her gloved hands in her lap. Poirot spoke quietly. "You are not Mrs. Hubbard. You are Linda Arden, the actress, the mother of Sonia Armstrong, the grandmother of Daisy." She gave a faint, sad smile. "You found me out, Monsieur Poirot. I should have known you would." Poirot said nothing. She continued. "After Cassetti walked free, I was not just angry. I was shattered. The law had failed us. I decided I would not let that be the end of it." She looked him in the eyes. "So I gathered those who had loved Daisy, those whose lives were ruined, and I asked them a question. Would they help make things right?" Poirot spoke gently. "And they agreed?" She nodded. "Some immediately, others with hesitation. But all came. We made it fair. 12 people, like a jury. No one forced. No one spared. One wound from each. It seemed poetic." Poirot asked, "Did you strike as well?" She hesitated. "No. I remained outside the room. I couldn't do it. But I planned it. So perhaps that's worse." Poirot leaned back in his chair. "You acted not as a murderer, but as justice itself." She replied quietly, "No. I acted as a mother." There was silence. Then she said, "Will you turn us in?" Poirot stood slowly. "I have not decided." Mrs. Hubbard, no, Linda Arden, said nothing more. She left the dining car with the grace of the stage legend she had once been. Poirot watched the door close behind her. Now he was left with one final task, to choose between two truths. The official truth, a stranger, vanished into the snow. And the real one, a community of grief, united in vengeance, hidden behind false names and innocent faces. It was not a matter of what was known. It was a matter of what should be said. Chapter 7. The sun had risen faintly over the snowbound tracks of the Orient Express, painting the frozen mountains with a thin sheen of gold. But inside the stranded train, the hours had blurred. Time no longer passed in minutes or meals. It passed in questions, in clues, in cold truths laid bare. Poirot had spoken with nearly everyone. Each conversation had pulled back another veil, exposed another corner of the carefully woven tapestry of lies. Now, it was time to speak with the most elusive of them all, the Countess Andreni. She had spoken little. She had wept once. She had hidden behind her husband's forceful presence. But Poirot knew, beneath the quiet poise was a woman who bore the heart of the case. And, perhaps, its key. She arrived mid-morning, escorted not by her husband but by the conductor. Her elegance was understated, a pearl brooch, gloves of the finest leather, and a long, pale coat lined with fur. Her posture was graceful but guarded. She entered the dining car with the calm of a woman who had prepared her whole life for scrutiny. Poirot stood as she approached. He gestured to the seat across from him. "Please, Countess, do be seated." She gave a small nod and sat, her hands folded in her lap. He began gently. "Madam, I have a confession to make. I know who you are." She did not react. Poirot continued, "You are not merely Countess Andreni. You are Helena Goldenberg, the youngest daughter of Linda Arden, sister to Sonia Armstrong, and aunt to the murdered child, Daisy." The Countess raised her eyes. Yes, she said softly. I am. Poirot observed her closely. You have concealed your identity, your true name, on your passport. The H was smudged. Deliberately, I believe. She nodded slowly. My husband insisted. He thought it best to keep me away from entanglement. Poirot's tone remained kind, but steady. He went as far as to remove your name from the list of suspects. When I first asked for your identity, I was told you were not on the train manifest. Her voice was faint. I didn't want to be part of this. I didn't want to be drawn back into that pain. Poirot said, and yet, you boarded this train. You knew Cassetti was on it. She swallowed. I did. My mother asked me to come. She said it was only a journey. I didn't ask what she meant. Poirot leaned forward. And when you learned what the others had planned? There was silence. Then, I refused. I did not strike him. Poirot studied her face. I believe you. But I also believe you were present. And in your presence, you gave them your blessing. Tears formed in her eyes. I wanted justice, but I couldn't bring myself to act. Poirot nodded, not with judgment, but with understanding. You loved Daisy. She closed her eyes. She was sunshine, pure sunshine. Her laughter, her eyes, the way she would hide beneath the piano and pretend to vanish. Poirot was silent for a moment. Then, that sunshine was stolen from you. And so you boarded a train bound not just for Europe, but for the past. She opened her eyes and met his. Do you condemn me, Monsieur Poirot? He shook his head. I merely gather the pieces of the puzzle. I leave judgment for those who are braver than I. She left quietly, like a breeze passing through velvet. Poirot remained still, hands clasped before him, thoughts racing behind his calm expression. The full web of the Armstrong tragedy was now illuminated. All that remained was to understand how every strand had tightened around the man who lay stabbed in his bed. And for that, he would need to speak to Michel. Pierre Michel, the train conductor, arrived not long after. His face was drawn, more with weariness than guilt. He stood respectfully before taking the seat opposite Poirot. Poirot spoke first. Michel, you are not simply the conductor of this train. Michel tilted his head. I am not sure what you mean, monsieur. Poirot continued, you are also the father of Suzanne Michel, the maid who was falsely accused after Daisy Armstrong's disappearance. The color drained from the man's face. Poirot's voice remained calm. She was innocent. She was hounded. And she took her own life. Michel's eyes welled with tears. She was only 19, he whispered. She had never harmed a soul. When the newspapers turned on her, she couldn't bear the shame. She flung herself from a window. Poirot waited a beat, then asked, Did you kill Cassetti? Michel's voice cracked. I was offered the chance. But I said no. I could not with these hands. Poirot asked, But you helped? Michel nodded. I helped them enter the compartment. I turned off the light in the corridor. I gave the signal. Poirot gave a single nod. You believed it was justice. Michel's voice was firm now. I still do. The story was now complete. 12 people, all drawn from the broken tapestry of the Armstrong household. Relatives, servants, friends, brought together by grief. Orchestrated by the famous actress and grieving grandmother, Linda Arden. Masked by misdirection. Staged with precision. Each had left a trace, some subtle, some brazen. But now, Poirot held all the cards. That evening, Poirot stood before Monsieur Bouc and Dr. Constantine once more. The dining car was quiet, the passengers tucked away behind polished doors. Poirot outlined the complete picture. Each of them had a role. Each of them had a reason. And all of them struck, or stood beside those who did. Bouc was pale. This is incredible. A communal murder. A moral trial. Poirot said, it was not law. It was justice. Personal, raw, and orchestrated with care. Dr. Constantine asked, what will you do with this knowledge? Poirot rose. I will prepare my report. And in it, I will offer two possible explanations. He paused. The first, the one I suspect the police will prefer, is that an unknown man boarded the train and committed the murder before escaping into the snow. Bouc nodded slowly. A simple answer. Poirot's voice was quiet. And the second, the truth, will remain between us. Outside, the snow had begun to thaw. The distant hum of an approaching rescue engine echoed through the mountains. Soon, the train would move again. The passengers would return to the world. And the murder of Cassetti, the man who was once Ratchet, would fade into the silence of the rails. But for Poirot, it was not simply a case. It was a test. Of justice. Of morality. Of conscience. 12 people had made their decision. Now, he would make his. Chapter 8. The engine's low whistle echoed from somewhere beyond the snowy ridge. Though the train itself remained still, something in the air had shifted. Inside the stranded compartments of the Orient Express, the weight of hidden truths had begun to lift. What was once a fog of lies now took on the clearer shape of a story, one bound by tragedy, told in blood. Hercule Poirot had nearly completed the canvas. All that remained was to color in the details, and confront the final two figures who had so artfully cloaked themselves in distraction. He summoned Mr. Hardman, the flamboyant, mustached American who had claimed to be a private detective hired by Ratchet for protection. Hardman entered the dining car, less brash than usual. His eyes darted, as if unsure of what part he was still meant to be playing. Poirot gestured to the seat across from him. Hardman, Saturday, you wanted to speak to me again, Mr. Poirot. Poirot nodded. Indeed, Mr. Hardman. Or should I say, Cyrus Bethune-Hardman, formerly of the Pinkerton Agency, and fiancé to Suzanne Michel, the maid who was accused and died. Hardman stiffened. The color drained from his face. Poirot continued, when Suzanne took her life, you left the force. But you didn't stop searching, did you? You traced the man responsible, and waited for your chance. Hardman leaned forward, voice cracking. She was the kindest soul I'd ever met. When they dragged her name through the papers, said she was guilty, that she'd let the baby be taken, she lost herself. I should have protected her. I should have done something. Poirot studied him. You joined this group not out of blood or obligation, but for love. Hardman's fists clenched. I didn't even hesitate. When Linda Arden told me the plan, I was in. Poirot tilted his head. And your role? I stood watch. I kept time. I helped cover our tracks. But I didn't stab him. Poirot paused. But you would have. Hardman's voice dropped. I would have slit his throat if they let me. Poirot gave a small nod, more in acknowledgement than approval. Thank you, Mr. Hardman. That is all. Hardman rose and left without another word. With that, only two remained, the soldier and the governess. Colonel Arbuthnot and Mary Debenham. He had saved them for last. Not because they were the most suspicious, but because they were the most careful. He called them together, requesting their presence simultaneously. They entered side by side, not touching, but close enough to imply an unspoken pact. Both wore neutral expressions, though Mary's eyes flickered with calculation. Arbuthnot's posture was stiff, almost defiant. They Saturday. Poirot remained standing, arms folded behind him. He began with Mary. "You were the Armstrongs' governess." She nodded once. "Yes." "You were dismissed after Daisy's death." "No. I resigned. I couldn't bear the house without her." Poirot turned to Arbuthnot. "You, Colonel, served with Mr. Armstrong in India." "I did. A finer officer I have never known." Poirot paced slowly. "You both boarded the train in Istanbul. You knew of each other's presence." "Yes." Mary spoke. "We planned to meet in London. We took precautions." Poirot raised a brow. "Precautions?" Mary's lips tightened. "We did not wish to be associated." Colonel Arbuthnot interjected. "We have no shame in our connection, Poirot. But we understood the dangers of assumption." Poirot turned. "You two were the linchpins. The calm ones. The rational ones. You orchestrated the movements, managed the timings. I suspect it was you, Mary, who assigned the order of the stabbing." Mary said nothing. Poirot looked at the Colonel. "And you were the strong arm. The protector. The last line of defense." Arbuthnot nodded. "She shouldn't have had to carry it alone." Poirot stepped closer. "I remember what you said on the platform, Miss Debenham. Not now. Not here. When it's all over. You were speaking of the murder, weren't you?" Mary met his gaze. "I was." Poirot said, "You feared I'd unravel it too soon." "I feared you'd stop it," she said. Poirot took a breath. "And would that have been wrong?" Mary's voice trembled only slightly. "It would have been premature." Poirot said nothing. He motioned toward the door. "You are dismissed." They rose and left together, the bond between them tighter than ever, forged not by romance, but by complicity. Poirot remained behind, alone now in the dining car. Outside, the snow had thinned. The sun carved bright patterns along the icy window panes. From the front of the train, the engine hissed faintly, signs of life returning to the iron beast. It was nearly over. And yet, something pulled at Poirot, a whisper of thought, an echo of doubt. Not doubt in the solution, but in the next step. To speak the truth? Or to tell the lie that would spare 12 lives, and bury one crime under another? He walked slowly back toward his compartment. Along the corridor, he passed doors now closed, passengers sitting in silence, each one alone with their thoughts. In Mrs. Hubbard's room, a candle flickered. In the Countess's, faint piano music drifted from a record. In Michel's compartment, a crucifix lay turned to the wall. It was not guilt they wore, but peace. And Poirot, who had spent his life chasing justice, was not so sure it belonged here. In his cabin, Poirot placed each piece of the puzzle onto the table. The pipe cleaner, the monogrammed handkerchief, the button from Michel's uniform, the broken watch, the burned paper with Daisy's name, the red kimono, found, curiously, in his own luggage. He stared at them, not as clues, but as symbols. Tokens from the theater of retribution. And in the quiet of his thoughts, he reconstructed the night. He saw it clearly now. The train stopped. A signal was given, perhaps a knock. The conductor was occupied. Each member of the group entered, one by one, into Ratchet's cabin. Cassetti, drugged with a sedative slipped into his drink earlier, never fully woke. Each person stepped forward. Each struck. Some hesitated. Others stabbed with fury. When it was done, they wiped their prints, replaced the blanket, restored the watch, dimmed the lights. The kimono, a final flourish, placed to confuse. Then each returned to their cabins, where they would pretend to sleep. The plan had worked. Almost. Poirot had found the cracks, the mismatched times, the misplaced emotions, the half-told stories. And now he knew the truth. But truth, he realized, is not always justice. He heard a knock at his door. It was Monsieur Bouc. "The rescue train has arrived, Poirot. We must prepare." Poirot nodded slowly. "Gather all the passengers in the dining car." Bouc hesitated. "You are going to tell them?" Poirot replied, "I am going to tell them what must be told." A half-hour later, the passengers of the Orient Express were seated together once more. No one spoke. Poirot stood at the head of the car. "My friends," he began, "I have considered all the facts, the clues, the stories, and I have come to a conclusion." He paused. "There are two possible solutions to the murder of Mr. Ratchet." All eyes were on him. Poirot continued. "The first is the simple one. A man, unknown to any of you, boarded the train. He entered Mr. Ratchet's cabin, committed the crime, and fled into the night. He let the words settle. Then, the second is more complicated. It is a tale of grief, of justice unfulfilled, of people brought together not by coincidence, but by shared tragedy." He turned slowly to face each one of them. In this story, 12 people, each with a motive, each with a loss, conspired to kill a man who had escaped the law. They formed a jury. They passed sentence. And they carried it out. He stepped back. "I leave it to you, Monsieur Bouc, and to the authorities, to decide which solution should be believed." There was silence. Then Linda Arden, Mrs. Hubbard, stood. "If someone must be held accountable, let it be me. I will say I acted alone." Poirot raised a hand. "No need. The first theory, the simple one, shall be the official version." Gasps rippled around the table. Poirot said, "You see, Ms. Amos, the law is built to punish the guilty. But there are times when the guilty have already been punished." He walked slowly toward the rear of the car. "And in such moments, it is not the law we must consult, but our conscience." He turned once more, offering a slight bow. "Farewell, my friends. May you never have cause to meet me again." Outside, the rescue engine blew its horn. The Orient Express groaned as it came back to life. But for the 12 who sat in silence, justice had already moved on. And Hercule Poirot, the detective who had uncovered everything, chose, for once, to look the other way. Chapter 9. The Orient Express rumbled back to life, wheels groaning against the frozen track. Snowbanks receded slowly as the great engine pulled forward, not just toward civilization, but away from the silence of murder and the echoes of revenge. Inside the dining car, Hercule Poirot remained seated, chin resting lightly on his hand, watching the landscape blur past the window. Mountains gave way to hills. The world, it seemed, had begun moving again. And yet, the moral stillness lingered. Two truths sat within him now, like twin reflections in a mirror. Each one perfect. Each one incompatible. It was not a question of what had happened. That he knew. It was a question of what should be remembered. As the train pressed westward, Poirot was joined once again by Monsieur Bouc and Dr. Constantine. Neither man looked entirely comfortable. Bouc cleared his throat. "I confess, mon ami, I did not sleep well last night." Poirot smiled gently. "Most people find peace in the solving of a crime. You find unrest." Bouc leaned forward. "You chose the false solution." Poirot replied, "I chose a solution. One that required no arrests, no trials, no ruin." Dr. Constantine chimed in. "And yet, you know it was the other." Poirot nodded. "I do." He rose slowly, hands clasped behind his back as he paced. There are, as I have said, two solutions to this crime. He paused at the window. The first, a stranger boards the train, unseen. He kills Ratchet, then vanishes into the storm. He turned back to them. The second, 12 individuals, united by grief and bound by justice, formed a jury in the night. Each dealt a blow. Each shared the guilt or the absolution. Bouc asked, "And which do you believe the world deserves to hear?" Poirot took a long breath. "Whichever the world is ready to understand." A few hours later, he stood again before the passengers, not to question, but to conclude. They gathered in the dining car, as before, seated in solemn silence. The train now hummed gently beneath their feet, a reminder that their time together was drawing to a close. Poirot began. When a crime is committed, there is often one truth, one villain, one motive. He glanced around the table. But in this case, there were many. He gestured slowly, methodically, as he named them. Mary Debenham, the governess who lost her beloved pupil. Colonel Arbuthnot, the officer loyal to a fallen friend. Princess Dragomarov, godmother to Sonia Armstrong. Greta Schlessorn, the nurse who could not protect a child. Countess Andreni, Daisy's aunt, haunted by the past. Michel, the father of the maid accused. Antonio Foscarelli, the chauffeur who watched a family collapse. Cyrus Hardman, the detective who lost the woman he loved. Hildegard Schmidt, the cook who had soothed a grieving home. Mr. McQueen, the secretary whose father defended a doomed case. Dr. Constantine, the impartial witness who came to understand too much. And Linda Arden, the mother, the mastermind, and the grief that bound them all. He paused. 12 wounds, 12 hands, 12 lives intersected by one terrible loss. Poirot walked slowly along the length of the car. You killed a man who had escaped the law, but not your memory. Mrs. Hubbard, no, Linda Arden, spoke at last. Do you condemn us? Poirot shook his head. No, I acknowledge you. Outside the window, the countryside unfurled. Trees bent by wind, distant rooftops glinting in the noon sun. The train had passed through the storm and emerged into something gentler. Poirot returned to his seat and retrieved his notebook. I have prepared 2 reports, he said quietly. One I will submit. The other I will burn. No one spoke, but many exhaled at once, a collective breath held for too long. Later, in the corridor, Poirot met the Countess again. She stood by the window, arms crossed, eyes far away. You knew I couldn't do it, she said, not turning. I did, Poirot replied. But you did something greater. You gave it your forgiveness. She turned to face him. Will that be enough? He tilted his head. For whom? She didn't answer. As the sun dipped lower, Poirot prepared for the next station. The train would soon disembark. Customs would ask questions. Journalists would gather. The world would resume its pace. The truth, the real one, would remain on the tracks behind them. He adjusted his tie. At the door, he paused, glancing once more at the blood-stained clues tucked in his valise. They were not relics now. They were reminders of the only case he had ever solved and chosen not to name. Chapter 10. The train had crossed the mountains. Snowdrifts gave way to green hills and winding valleys. The sunlight no longer glared across white silence. It danced across thawed fields and distant towns. Steam rose from the locomotive in clean, rhythmic clouds as the Orient Express neared its destination. But inside the first-class coach, silence still hung thick, a silence no engine could outpace. For those aboard, it was not just a journey from Istanbul to Calais. It had become a pilgrimage, through guilt, through grief, through justice, and back again. And for Hercule Poirot, it had become something else entirely. A test not of detection, but of morality. He sat alone in the now-cleared dining car. The morning meal had come and gone, replaced by tea service and the low clink of silver against china. Outside, they would arrive at Broad in less than an hour. There, customs officers would board the train. Uniformed men would ask questions, take down names, examine compartments. But what would they be told? Poirot turned the small notebook in his hands. 2 reports sat before him, each neat, complete, indisputable. One told of a mysterious stranger who boarded the train in the night and murdered Samuel Ratchet, an unknown assailant who vanished into the snowy Balkans before dawn. The other told the truth. 12 people. 1 act. A sentence passed not in a courtroom but in a sleeping car, under candlelight, in silence. The door to the car opened quietly. Monsieur Bouc stepped inside. His face was composed, though his eyes betrayed unease. Poirot, the customs officers will arrive shortly. Have you decided which report you will give them? Poirot looked up. I have. He placed one of the reports into his briefcase. The other he folded, slowly, and slipped into the small metal ashtray beside his seat. He struck a match. The paper curled in the flame, blackening at the edges, shrinking into ash. Bouc watched, then exhaled deeply. You chose the lie. Poirot looked up at him with calm certainty. I chose mercy. Elsewhere, the passengers began to stir. The Countess Andreni adjusted her gloves with a newfound lightness in her eyes. Colonel Arbuthnot stood at the window, silent, hands behind his back. Mary Debenham poured tea for Greta Chausson, who looked near tears but smiled. Antonio Foscarelli laughed at something Michel had said, the 2 men sharing a moment they never would have before. Princess Dragomarov sat tall, her rings flashing in the morning sun, her head held higher than ever. Only Mrs. Hubbard, or rather Linda Arden, remained apart. She sat in her cabin, alone, a photograph of Daisy clutched in her hands. The formidable actress, the mastermind, the grieving grandmother. And now, a woman forgiven. Poirot made one final round of the train. He passed each compartment, pausing briefly at each door. He did not knock. He did not intrude. He simply acknowledged, with a glance, with a quiet nod, those who had shared in the long night of judgment. And when he reached the final cabin, he paused longer. Inside, the room once belonging to Ratchet was now empty. The bed had been stripped, the walls wiped clean. But Poirot still saw it all. The body, the wounds, the blooded blade. The echoes of that room would fade, but never disappear. At Broad, the customs officers boarded with brisk authority. They asked questions. They examined luggage. Poirot presented his report. There was a man, he said evenly. Tall, dark, foreign. He boarded the train sometime after Vinkovci. He was seen near the victim's compartment. When the murder was discovered, he had vanished. His footprints led to the forest. It was a lie. Polished, plausible, elegant. The kind of lie a genius might invent to conceal the raw truth of human pain. The officers were satisfied. No arrests were made. No weapons found. The Orient Express rolled on. Hours later, the train arrived at its final destination. The platform buzzed with activity, porters shouting, whistles blowing, luggage rolling in every direction. The passengers disembarked slowly. Each carried their own weight. Some had left it behind. Others carried it still. Linda Arden was among the last to descend. She approached Poirot. I didn't expect mercy from a man like you. Poirot replied, Then perhaps you misunderstood the purpose of justice. She gave a sad smile. I don't regret what we did, but I'm grateful that you understood why. Poirot looked toward the horizon, the trains, the moving people. You took the law into your own hands. She answered, and you returned it. They shook hands. Then she was gone, swallowed by the crowd, a woman returning to the world. As the last passengers faded from view, Poirot remained on the platform. Bouc stood beside him. This will not be an easy burden, my friend. Poirot gave a quiet sigh. No burden ever is, if you carry it with integrity. Bouc smiled. Then perhaps it is best the world never learns what you know. Poirot turned. Let them sleep. The guilty are not always evil, and justice is not always loud. The Orient Express released one final plume of steam. Poirot boarded the next train, a smaller one, bound for London. He settled into his seat, placed his briefcase on the rack, and closed his eyes for a moment. Outside, the countryside rolled by, endless, green, unbothered by crimes or their consequences. And in the hush of the carriage, one final thought rose in Poirot's mind. A murder had been committed, but perhaps, just this once, the greater wrong would have been to punish it. And so, the story draws to a close. Another journey taken beneath the quiet hush of moonlight, where secrets were uncovered and justice found its shadowed path. If this story stirred your imagination, I invite you to join us again. There are many more tales waiting to be told, each one whispered gently. Don't forget to subscribe to Moonlight Audiobook and tap the bell icon so you'll never miss when the next chapter begins.